Mercedes-Benz used to have legendary longevity, vehicles that were built to run millions of miles. I mean, we talk about some of the older vehicles in Europe that were used for taxi cabs that would run over 1,000,000 kilometers all day, each and every day. Can some of the modern day Mercedes-Benz do anything even close to that? Well, we're talking about here the 4th generation C-Class Mercedes, the W205. Right here, we're going to feature this if this vehicle is a loser or a legend. From 2015 to 2018, it went through some major changes, but some very important changes are the drivetrain, the transmission, the engine, as well as some of the chassis components that have changed over the years. Let's get into that, because this will tell whether this vehicle clearly has the longevity and the staying power to run hundreds of thousands of miles. Mercedes has a patented rear subframe assembly design in this new revised vehicle. With the combination of components like that rear subframe, as well as the vast amounts of aluminum used scattered throughout the chassis, Mercedes-Benz and this modern day 4th generation C-Class has been able to shed 220 pounds or about 100 kilograms off the overall weight of the vehicle. It also, believe it or not, now complies with the EU6 regulations. So it's a fast forward into modern day regulations. As we know, in Germany and specifically in Europe, they are pushing very aggressively for emissions regulations, and cars have to start complying. This one does comply in that regard. Now for this updated generation, it comes in multiple different forms. This one here is a C300, features a 242 horsepower turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, and I'll share more details about that. But you can get different drivetrains. You can get C63 with turbocharged V8. You can also get cabriolets, which is also a 2-door coupe and a convertible top, or a coupe like this with a hard top, and as well sedan, which means you have a remade up rear assembly. The taillights look different. You have 4 doors. Largely it's the same chassis, but the overall design looks substantially different with 4 doors, 5 seats. This one only gives you 4 seats. This generation naturally in any Mercedes-Benz is going to have 4-door discs, and this one is no different. We have disc brakes all the way around on this vehicle. You'll notice right here discs, calipers right there. But most importantly, when you look at the front steps up the game, because that's where most of the brake bias applies. When you're braking hard, most of the weight pushes forward, and the front brakes generally do most of the braking. You'll notice the caliper size is quite substantially different, and you have cross-drilled ventilated discs up front, allowing you to stop this vehicle from aggressive speeds should you be driving on the Autobahn, or even possibly taking it out for the odd autocross trip. Now, the previous generation before this actually featured a V6 engine under the hood, and many Mercedes enthusiasts truly scoffed at the idea of what came after that V6, because before that, the C300 did represent that particular displacement. Now, instead of having 3 liters of displacement in the C300, you merely have 2. The 2 is swapped out. You've got a turbocharger in there now, and it bumps up the power. So you actually have better performance, better power, more torque, as well as better fuel economy in this modern day vehicle than you do with the outgoing V6. But we all know small turbocharged engines can make power. The question is, can they last?
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
In the car, it's very quiet, it stays composed, and that engine and the transmission just make sure that you're always in the sweet spot, that you've got the right RPM for the right speed, and that you're getting the maximum performance. It gets up to speed very, very nicely, as you can see right there. Merge in quietly, and it's very, very quiet. You barely hear any noise on the road, other than just a slight little hum, but that's just typical road noise. It's a very, very quiet drive. It drives nicely, and quite honestly, the engine just purrs along, and it's no shortage of performance. It's quiet, and honestly, the engine just, you know, here as we're loafing along at 100 kilometers an hour, it's only doing about 1500 RPM on the tachometer. Clearly, it keeps it at a comfortable little jaunt, just enough to keep the power there, but just enough as well to keep the performance and as well as the fuel economy in check. See, there you go. You've got the Tesla drivers, classic as you see, tailgating the next guy in line. But definitely, I would say that the drive of these vehicles, that this engine is a winner. These engines do drive very, very nicely. They're quiet, they have enough performance. The transmissions that they're mated up to as well do a very nice job with the 9G here. and the 9-speed automatic is just an absolute joy. In many ways, I would suggest that it's almost a legend. The only thing you're giving up is the sound effects. But the longevity and the fact that you don't have some of those other outstanding reliability challenges with some of the older engines, it does seem like it's definitely a small price to pay with some of these newer drivetrains. This W205 and the M274 engine is just an absolute treasure to drive. If you're liking the video so far, you're gonna love the rest of the channel. Be sure to hit that subscribe button down below and don't forget the notifications bell so you know when the next amazing videos come. Okay, well, let's take a look under the hood, shall we? Let's just reach under here. First of all, I've done multiple videos on this engine. I've featured some maintenance aspects of this because we've had this vehicle for 4 years. I've done some maintenance tasks. I'll link that in the video at the end just for your own personal observation if you're interested in maybe doing some of that work yourself. These vehicles are actually relatively simple to work on for the most part. So as of 2016, Mercedes-Benz applied a new transmission. We featured the 9G-tronic, or the 9-speed automatic transmission that runs up to 2018. That's what this vehicle gives you, is 9 speeds, so it gives you the ability in top gear to drive down the freeway quietly, peacefully, serenely, and more importantly, in the best fuel economy possible. So that automatic transmission is shown to be quite reliable. But here we have a Renault-derived 2.0 turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. But with this engine, you actually get a direct injected drivetrain. It's 4 valves per cylinder. And with the 4 valves per cylinder, it allows a lot of fuel in, a lot of exhaust out, and it gives you the performance you need. So the all aluminum engine now is direct injected, so it gets you better fuel metering. That said, you know, direct injected engines have their own challenges. It also features what they call the M274 engine, is what this is actually derived in Mercedes world. The 270 engine is the transversely mounted. Now, you would generally use a transversely mounted engine when you're utilizing it in cars that actually predominantly front wheel drive. So the M270 is front wheel drive vehicles like the CLA, the GLA, uses a slightly detuned version of the same engine, the 270. But the 274 is a longitudinal engine, so an engine that runs front to back. You're going to find that in C-Class, E-Class, the GLC, for example, which uses the same drivetrain. A 180 kilowatt engine, or the 242 horsepower engine, is going to be a longitudinal mounted engine. Now, interestingly enough, when I search the classifieds and I look for used versions of these vehicles, the 4th generation Mercedes-Benz with these same engines, so C300s, coupe, or of course the sedan, it's actually quite surprising to me the amount of miles that you're finding on a lot of these cars. Why do I say that? Well, because previous generation Mercedes, as a lot of vehicles like VAG, Volkswagen Audi Group product, Porsche, and even, again, as I've said, some of the Mercedes-Benz had issues with timing chains. With the guide ramps or the guides, they're plastic in most cases, and a lot of times the tensioners start failing. Some of the vehicles even carry single row timing chains, which are known to stretch and fail. And whenever you have timing gear issues, that's bad news. Well, so far, the way it looks, reliability-wise, these cars are actually pretty stout. And that's what impresses me most, because actually having to search autotrader.com and going looking and see what's on the market out there, and you can find a lot of these vehicles for sale. And I'm talking 2016, 2017, 2018. So vehicles that are less than 10 years old. And I've seen as many as 240, almost 250,000 miles on many of them. As a matter of fact, you could find a ton of these vehicles at 140, 150,000 miles. That's 18,000 miles a year. That's a lot of mileage. So clearly these vehicles are being used. They're great daily vehicles. People are piling the miles on them, and clearly they're not catastrophically failing. That said, I mean, you can look over the forums and you're always going to find people with problems. And there are historically some problems with the early generation of the M274 or the 270 engines, where one cylinder tends to pop. In some cases, there's been malfunctions, fuel mixing, maybe using poor grade of fuel, or some other random issues seems to have initiated a catastrophic engine failure, blowing holes and essentially low compression in a cylinder or two. Those conditions are actually quite rare, and unfortunately, you do see them. They have happened. That said, there's a lot of these cars now that are easily making 100, 150, 200,000 miles and beyond. Now, we've had a few frustrating moments with the car, but I will say there's a lot of things that I really do enjoy about it. I've done some work on it for a while. I mean, we've had to change the battery. For example, everything's neatly tucked away, but they do a great job of packaging this up. I mean, if you want to do a cabin air filter, you've got to do it under there. Here, you have easy access to your battery. You're able to charge it. If you have a low battery issue, you can basically charge it right here. It's super easy without actually having to be right on the terminal of the battery, because everybody knows charging and boosting is dangerous right on the terminals. Right here, it allows you to sort of keep somewhat sheltered. I love that access. Keeps it nice and tidy, out of sight, out of mind, but it's super easy to take that apart. Coolant levels, very easy to check. I like when things are easy to check, and Mercedes, you know, they're like a lot of car brands, they're labeling, everything's labeled, you know, protective warning labels here, talk about, you know, fittings, here's adjustments right here for your lights. You know, they're giving you all that information that you need right there. Of course, to fill up your windshield washer fluid, you go over here, and even your brake fluid is buried under here, but very easy to access. Everything's out of sight for sure. Not something you want to look at, those ugly bottles, but it's easy to look at. See, it's right there. It's easy to gain access to without being a total eyesore. Here's your windshield washer fluid. Everything is quite actually accessible. Look down there. You have actually a lot of room. A lot of these modern engines these days are building them very, very tight. So you'll have the grill and then right up tight to the engine. But because this engine and this chassis does actually come with V8s in some cases, in some applications, they generally build it for a larger engine. And in doing so, when you have the smaller engine, it actually does fill up the engine bay, but it does give you also more workability. I mean, I look down in there and I love the access for the serpentine belt. If you have to do some of these rad hose maintenance changes, things are fairly accessible. Unlike a lot of the Audi products where you have to actually pull the bumper off to actually gain access to any of that, I'm not the biggest fan of, you know, these little snap-on fittings. I've expressed that before with BMW, how a lot of BMW hoses eventually go. They start to make, you know, they start to leak and have problems with time. These ones also are using similar types of hoses. And, you know, I would imagine with enough heat cycles, you're gonna start to have some leaks and problems with some of these snap-on fittings and hoses, but they are cute, they look nice, they're easy to use, snap together. If I could change that, I'd much rather have a good old-fashioned spring clamp and a standard hose. These are definitely proprietary. You're gonna pay top dollars, so if any hose leaks, that's a downside. I mean, they're high quality, they're well made, but again, being proprietary, you're going to spend a lot of money. These hoses are not going to be cheap. They're all custom bent. There's nothing, you know, like a Toyota might be just a rubber hose from A to B and they have a couple of crimps. These ones here are definitely more of a proprietary. One size fits none, only just this particular unit there. So things aren't necessarily going to be the cheapest for parts, but the accessibility is quite good. I definitely like what I see under here. And these are classic examples of all of the aluminum structure that Mercedes is starting to use. Some of the weight savings. I mean, the weight savings goes a long ways. Weight savings, you know, you need less power to move a vehicle along. If there's less weight, it's going to move along a little more briskly. It's going to save fuel. And aluminum is definitely able to do that. Aluminum, when well designed, can hold up very, very well. And we know crash testing test results for these vehicles actually does very, very well too. And Mercedes-Benz, because of the crash testing as well as the headlights and the way they illuminate, it actually ranks very high in terms of overall safety rating. The overall drivetrain that you get with this 2-liter turbo 4, it makes enough power and performance, and with the mileage that I'm seeing on a lot of these vehicles, it's hard to not love it. Now, it's not going to give you that legendary sound you get from a nice naturally aspirated engine. You know, a good V6 or a nice, even better, a V8 are going to make much better sounds, but they do okay. From a performance standpoint, drivability, you're going to have a little turbo lag, but the engine does create enough power and performance and torque to make it interesting to drive. I like the materials that they use. Again, you know, lots of plastics here just where it doesn't matter, but plastics, they don't use a lot of extra plastics in here other than, you know, on a few of these ends, which again, I've already mentioned, that could be a problem with age. But as I've already seen, that a lot of these vehicles we're seeing with 152, 250,000 miles on them, I mean, we're talking 300,000 to 400,000 kilometers with some of these vehicles. That's no joke. These engines will run the distance. Mercedes also claims that with the new aluminum restructure in this W205, that it's way more stiff than you're getting from some of the competition. And I would argue that, you know, we're talking Audi and BMW, and while all of those generally do handle very, very well, I mean, even little details like having the double locks on the hood is something that a lot of the German cars are doing. You know, I've seen a lot of these on the BMWs. I've seen a lot of those on the other performance brands from Europe, and quite often those from, say, the likes of Toyota often do not go to that detail, that nth degree. They generally don't need to, because those vehicles aren't intended for performance driving. So you don't typically find them on Toyotas. But on Mercedes-Benz, a lot of those sort of details are taken into account to make sure that that hood stays down when you're driving in a spirited fashion. Now, the engine was so successful, Infiniti, Nissan grabbed a hold of the engine. So the QX50 is an SUV by Infiniti that also shares a derivative of this drivetrain. Yes, a slightly detuned version of this engine is what you'll find in the previous generation QX50. Now, that's not one of the problem areas, and a lot of people like to say, well, Infinitis and Nissans have been very unreliable. That's only in their variable compression motors or their CVT transmissions, neither of which this one uses. And so the engine that's used in here, this derivative of the M274 and 270 that you're finding even in the Infinitis, are quite robust. It's actually also a surprisingly easy vehicle to work on. Now, granted, there's a lot of packaging going on here. There's a lot of parts that are buried right in there. But this is actually a lot better than a lot of modern day vehicles you're finding today. I mean, I like to explore an engine. Whenever I look around, I have a quick look to see how things are easily accessed, because I'm a do-it-yourselfer. And the only way you can keep a vehicle on the road for a long period of time, like this Mercedes-Benz, is by doing maintenance, repairs, when they fail, if there's a leak, if there's maintenance required. Outside of warranty, a lot of people know you're paying $250 shop rate. A lot of people shy away from that, and then they start neglecting some of the maintenance. And then next thing you know, the vehicle starts to fail because they haven't looked after it. And then hence the vehicles get a bad name. When in fact, actuality, a lot of people I've spoke to, many Europeans that say, well, Mercedes-Benz always seem to last longer. And the way it looks right now is a lot of these vehicles, generally the culture in Germany is one which, sure, while the vehicles are slightly more complex, people generally take care of their vehicles better in Europe than they do here in North America. Now, that's not to say that these vehicles don't have their inherent issues. They're not nearly the problematic vehicles that a lot of people crack them up to be. As a matter of fact, maintenance is actually relatively simple on these vehicles. I did in that video, I showed you to change this air filter. Quite simple. You have to take off this input pipe, and this just pops right off. Also, easy to access your oil fill. Down there is your oil filter. Of course, that's quite easy. You have to take this off, you have to take this off, and then you have access. Quite easy. And on top of it, you're even able to suck the oil out of the top, like a lot of the dealers do. Now, granted, most people are going to say, well, you have to drain it out the bottom, but quite often, it's actually not that complicated. Pulling the oil out of the top, you'd be surprised. If you do more frequent oil changes, most of that sludge comes out with it at the top. Another add-on, which is great about these engines, and you're seeing less and less of these on the market these days, are the availability and the use of dipsticks. Well, this engine uses a dipstick. It makes it very, very easy for daily checks. You can also check the general condition of the oil, as well as the functionality of the level. You don't have to wait 20 minutes like many other cars today. The overall maintenance aspect of this vehicle is top shelf. The reliability is excellent on these vehicles. The performance is great. And on top of it, you're starting to see these vehicles with 150 to 250,000 miles on them all day long. So while many people get caught up in driving cars like Toyota and Lexus vehicles, while those are ultra reliable in many ways, they aren't subjected to the same service duty in the service cycle. Mercedes-Benz are built to last. High-speed runs, Autobahn, the Autostrada, they're meant to run in those conditions. Toyota Camrys are not. So they're not built as ruggedly. They're also not pushed as hard. And so these vehicles generally are. However, if you do the maintenance on these vehicles, I would go far as to say, if we're talking about this, is this a legend or a loser? I would say this modern late model generation Mercedes-Benz with this turbo 4-cylinder engine, going to be a future legend. That said, of course, right there, you want to check out my service maintenance on this vehicle where I saved a $1,200 shop fee. And on top of it, definitely check there some of the worst vehicles you're going to find this year. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. See you then. Bye-bye.